Welcome to a special edition of our Kearney Procurement Analytic Solutions, The Wave of the Future podcast series. Today's podcast is the 100th podcast in our series. I'm Helen Clegg, and my guests today are Enrico Rizzon and Kate Hart. Enrico is a Vice President with Kearney Procurement Analytic Solutions based in Melbourne, Australia. Kate is also based in Melbourne and is an associate with our Kearney Procurement Analytic Solutions unit. To celebrate our centennial podcast, Enrico and Kate are going to talk about a topical subject, the skills that Chief Procurement Officers need to possess in order to be successful in today's challenging world. Enrico, welcome to the podcast. Now, in a recent article that appeared in Supply Chain Management Review that you and Kate co-authored, you wrote that an Kearney study identifies 4 key challenges faced by CPOs today. To set the scene, can you share with us what these 4 key issues are?
Helen, it's a pleasure to be here on the 100th podcast. The 4 key issues or challenges for CPOs that Kearney has identified through its research and discussions are measuring performance, the increasing need to influence, becoming more strategic, and finally, attracting and developing talent. Now let me talk about each of these briefly. Measuring performance creates that tangible link between what procurement does and the value it delivers, which structured appropriately can assist in the influencing process. Next is increasing influence, and the commensurate skills are becoming very important for CPOs and their procurement teams. As organisations become flatter and procurement moves from the indirect to the direct spend categories, we are seeing the need for procurement functions to operate outside of their silos and outside their traditional skill set. Next is becoming more strategic. As procurement's influence increased, it is moving from being a very transactionally focused function to a high value add function, which I like to call a commercial function, playing a core role at the executive table, thinking holistically about creating value, not just saving the next dollar. And finally, attracting and developing talent. You can't address the former issues and have success unless as a CPO you can attract and develop the right talent to help you deliver not just for today, but for tomorrow.
Enrico, I want to go back to the first challenge that you listed there about measuring performance. We hear a lot about metrics and measuring performance today, so how can CPOs leverage performance measurement to make themselves even more effective?
Helen, as mentioned, measuring performance is about creating that linkage between what a procurement function does and the value that they deliver. And once that linkage is established, it really helps to build the credibility for both the CPO and the procurement function. Once that credibility and trust have been established, what we see is that the doors that might otherwise have been closed to the CPO and the function are now open. Once access is given, then the procurement function and the CPO really have the ability to deliver another level of value for the organisations that they serve. And when that value is measured and the tangible link to procurement's role created, the CPO and his function's effectiveness will be significantly enhanced. This is how we see performance measurement driving effectiveness.
So Kate, I'd like to bring you in here. In the article, one of the points that came through was the fact that it seems that the ability to influence key decision makers is a key success factor for CPOs. So how can CPOs build their influence both within their own department as well as that of the whole organisation in which they're working?
Thanks, Helen. As Enrico mentioned, effective CPOs are able to link procurement to value creation and then communicate this across the business, resulting in more open doors and therefore additional opportunities to influence. So one way to increase the influence of CPOs in an organisation is to establish a robust performance measurement or value tracking process which has internal credibility. Additionally, for CPOs to capitalise on these open doors, they need to have the skills to be able to work across the business and demonstrate a broader business understanding. As a result, cross-functional expertise and experience is increasingly sought after in the procurement space and goes a long way in bridging the void between the traditional silos within organisations and thereby increasing the influence of CPOs. To bring this breadth of experience into procurement, we recommend that procurement teams are sourced from a wide range of background and skills to maximise the cross-functional knowledge within teams.
Kate, what about flatter organisational structures? What influence does a flatter organisational structure have on the ability of a CPO to build his or her influence?
The transition of organisations from hierarchical to the heavily matrix structures that we see today has meant that there are significantly more touch points for CPOs. As a result, the time is consumed by influencing within these complex organisational structures. This reinforces the need for a CPO to have a capable, multidimensional team working with him or her to focus on delivery and execution, as the time that a CPO can dedicate to delivery is impaired. The team needs to be able to fill the void once the opportunity has been created or the door has been opened, as Enrico has mentioned before. Another impact of the flatter organisations is that the scope for influencing non-traditional spend is increased. CPOs can have a direct impact on key strategic decisions across the business. As Sam Walsh, the CEO of Rio Tinto, comments in our article, business needs to be integrated at all levels across all functions.
Now, Enrico, I want to come back to you and ask you about the statement you wrote in your article about CPOs needing to be big thinkers to be more successful. What do you mean by this?
Helen, also quoting the CEO of Rio Tinto, Sam Walsh, who states that a CPO needs to be a strategic thinker, making sure procurement is not only aligned to the business, but a jump ahead of where the business is going. So the days of the CPO reacting to the needs of the business are numbered. And I really do want to stress the word reacting. I think procurement today really does need to become a much more proactive function, being that jump ahead. Once that credibility is built and the CPO has a seat at the executive table, they're required to not just be the Chief Procurement Officer, but they're required to be there as a contributor to that executive team. So the importance of being that big thinker and thinking about how procurement can play a role in addressing strategic issues is what is meant by the bigger thinker and how that helps the CPO be successful. An example is the strategy around inputs like packaging in the FMCG sector. In the recent past, for procurement leaders, the strategy was go to market, create the competitive dynamic, use other levers like low-cost country sourcing, should-cost modelling, and SKU optimisation to drive to a total lowest cost of ownership. But the strategy today is becoming more make versus buy, trading off the improved responsiveness of the make option with the innovation that might be foregone with the buy decisions. The answer is not straightforward, thus the need for CPOs to be big thinkers. This example really highlights the changing environment in which CPOs today are expected to contribute and deliver value.
Enrico, what about attracting and developing talent, which is the fourth key issue that you talked about at the beginning? How do CPOs attract and develop the right kind of talent within their own procurement function?
The phrase, the war for talent, Helen, was coined back in the early 90s. And this is a perennial problem that is faced not just by procurement, but the broader organisation too. Where procurement is different is that it has grown from a transactional function to a much more value-add function in the past decade. It's a more commercial function today than it ever was. The engagement is much broader across the organisation. The level of influence is much higher across the organisation. So there needs to be a capability uplift and new talent brought into the function that allows it to be all those things to the organisation so that the organisation's needs can best be met. So what does procurement need to do? Firstly, there needs to be pride in the procurement function. All too often we don't see that when we go into the organisations we work for. CPOs have a job to build the brand of procurement within their organisations, and it needs to be a brand that represents value and is valued within those organisations. It needs to be a brand that actually represents credibility and trust, and that's not just within its own organisation, but within the supply market if it is to be a truly effective function. The second point, in terms of developing that talent, is that once those people are in and working for procurement, procurement needs to encourage those people to have a broad set of professional experiences. In fact, beyond procurement. It's these broader experiences that will make the CPOs more effective and also enable them to attract talent from a broader pool. So the challenges here in terms of retaining, recruiting and growing talent are really one of the purchasing brand within the organisation, or should I say the procurement brand within the organisation. The type of individuals that procurement would choose, and then having the wherewithal to allow those people to grow not only within the function but outside the function, so that one day they may come back and be the CPOs that we need our organisations to have in the decades to come.
And Kate, just coming back to you, from your perspective, what words of advice would you have for someone coming into a career in procurement and aspiring to be a CPO?
To someone considering coming into procurement, I would say that procurement will offer you an exciting, challenging, dynamic career, a career where you have the unique ability to make a tangible difference to an organisation through delivering value to its bottom line. A key piece of advice is to look for opportunities to work in other functions such as sales, to understand how different areas of a business work. Don't be afraid to step outside of procurement to broaden your experience. Enrico has touched on it a number of times. Procurement needs people who can work cross-functionally and are able to think outside the traditional silo mentality that procurement has historically operated in. At AT Kearney, we feel that there are fantastic opportunities in procurement for young professionals, and to acknowledge this, we support a number of initiatives globally. In Australia, we support the Young Procurement Professional of the Year Award for a Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply. We also encourage MBA students who are studying procurement at colleges throughout the USA, Canada and Europe, where we support a student lab program. There is significant demand in procurement for talented professionals, and we think that it is an exciting career for people moving forward into the future.
Thanks, Kate. And finally, Enrico, to wrap up this podcast, how long do you think it's going to take before the majority of CPOs really do have a seat at the CEO table?
Helen, there are organisations that I believe are already there today. The CPOs are already at the executive table. They're playing the role that we've outlined through the discussion today. In fact, one organisation that I did some work with back in 2011 has actually positioned their procurement folk such that they own the company-wide profit improvement program. They have line of sight to all of the profit improvement initiatives, be they R&D, operations, sales and marketing based. And that's a very explicit and intentional strategy by the organisation. It gives procurement that line of sight to all of those initiatives, and in so doing, procurement can ask the question of how can I add value? How can I have my suppliers add value to those various initiatives? And through that, move from being a function that simply saves a dollar to actually creates a dollar. And so there are organisations, as I say, that are already there. I think the real challenge is for the followers or even the laggards who are just starting out on the procurement journey. For them it will be a 10-year or maybe even a 20-year journey before they reach where the leaders are today. But then, of course, the leaders aren't standing still. Procurement functions are evolving into commercial functions, taking on even broader roles. I think the work is cut out for the followers to really go harder and faster to be sure that they don't fall behind with respect to the leaders that they aspire to be, and in so doing, create more value for the organisations that they work for today.
Thanks, Enrico and Kate, for sharing your thoughts on what makes a CPO successful. To summarise, I'd like to pick 3 points you've mentioned today. Firstly, measuring performance is about creating a link between what a procurement function does and the value it delivers. Secondly, procurement needs to become much more integrated across businesses, and for this to happen, cross-functional experience and expertise is very important. And thirdly, CPOs need to be big thinkers to be successful. So on that note, I'd like to thank Enrico Rizzon and Kate Hart in Melbourne, Australia, for being my guests today. And I'd also like to thank our production engineer, Tom Klein, based in San Francisco. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Wave of the Future, our centennial edition. If you have any comments on this podcast or have a suggestion for a podcast topic that you'd like to see us talk about, please share your thoughts via Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @ATKPAS. This has been an AT Kearney Procurement and Analytic Solutions podcast production. Join us again soon for our next Wave of the Future podcast.